Several months ago, I started using vintage textbooks that are over a century old. And today, I want to share an update of what's worked, what hasn't, and why some of these forgotten books are actually probably better than what we've replaced them with. Hello, my name is Janae Daniels. I'm a wife, a mother of six, and I'm a former middle school teacher turned homeschool mom. I'm also an independent researcher and educational coach. Welcome to the School to Homeschool podcast. So, several months ago, just out of frustration, I started using vintage textbooks. And let me be more specific. Since starting to homeschool, I've done a deep dive into the history of the education system in the United States. And initially, it started with reading books by John Taylor Gatto, who is a 30-year veteran teacher in the New York school system. He was Teacher of the Year twice for New York City. He was New York State's Teacher of the Year once, which led me into the work of Charlotte Iserby, who was a senior policy advisor in the Reagan administration for the Department of Education. And that kind of was a springboard for me into studying various books from Horace Mann, the American education system. And then so I've read book after book after book about the history of the education system. And certain things keep coming up. And some of the things that have come up is that in the 1890s, a shift happened and progressive educators essentially kind of took over the education system. That's when we started getting, by the turn of the 20th century, we started getting social studies instead of history. A lot of these progressive educators were democratic socialists, supported Marxism, and we definitely see that in this shift in the education system. Now, we didn't have compulsory education laws until 1852, with Horace Mann in Massachusetts putting into place the first compulsory education laws in the United States. And frankly, the model that he chose was a Prussian model that would train soldiers to do what they were told, which is a whole nother podcast for a different time. But even then, the compulsory education laws, most states didn't adopt them. It took many states a long time to adopt them. And so it's not until like 1918 that finally the last state adopts compulsory education laws. We don't see the majority of people going to high school until the 1940s. Prior to that, people would go through 8th grade and then do different things. And I've talked about that in a different episode, in the high school episode. So what's interesting is then the industrial titans joined the fun, the early 20th century. John D. Rockefeller started the General Education Board. Andrew Carnegie got involved with teachers' colleges and giving grants to teachers' colleges and to people who would follow the curricula that were prescribed to them. And so ultimately, by the mid 20th century, we have teacher certifications and we have certain things being taught, certain textbooks being adopted, and things like that. And we see a gross shift in how things are taught, why they're taught. And I didn't know any of that until I started doing a deep dive. So several months ago, as I'm reading about the history of education, because that's what I have been reading for fun as of late, I became really disturbed. And I look at curricula. I became what's called an eclectic unschooler. For those of you who are not in the homeschooling community, eclectic means a person who pulls from multiple ideas and philosophies. I do love, there's lots of homeschooling philosophies, from the classical philosophy to Charlotte Mason. And I do pull from principles of all the philosophies because they are beautiful. And then the unschooling part, I'm not a radical unschooler. I do expect my kids, they need help at times learning things. So I don't leave them to their own devices to learn everything. My kids have to be able to read, write, and do arithmetic and mathematics up to a certain point. And then they spend the bulk of their afternoons pursuing their own interests, the subjects that are of most interest to them. And so that's where you get eclectic unschooler. That's what I call myself. I'm not anti-curricula. When I started homeschooling, I bought all of this homeschooling curricula. I spent a lot of money on it. it can get very expensive. And I was homeschooling my remaining 4 kids. I pulled them during COVID. My oldest 2 had graduated from high school. And so I I started purchasing curricula based on people's recommendations. And so that most people don't understand this. In the homeschooling world, there are over 7,000 plus curricula to choose from. So it's very daunting. So I picked some, cost a lot of money, and I found very quickly that I didn't love them. Now, I'm a former teacher, so I thought I would love the curricula. And ultimately, I abandoned most of the curriculum because I felt like it was better than what they were getting in public school, certainly, because I still have some of my kids' textbooks from their public school. They're definitely more clear than a lot of the public school curriculum that's out there, mainstream, but it's still, number one, expensive. And number two, a lot of times it's just a lot. And sometimes it's wordy. There's a lot to process. And in some ways I'm a simpleton. And so I start reading the instructions for the parent to do the lessons. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so much. And this will take the child so much time. And through homeschooling, I've realized it doesn't take that long for a child to learn something. And so it became daunting to me, a lot of this curricula. So I abandoned most of it for a very long time. So a few months ago, as I'm again diving into the history of education, and I'm reading Charlotte Iserby's book, The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, I notice she brings up some of the changes that happened at the turn of the 20th century. And I remembered that I had a couple textbooks from the 1800s from a box of historic books that, anyway, it's a long story. I've talked about it in another episode. So I started with Ray's arithmetic series. Now this was published in 1877. This is actually an original copy. It's historic. You can buy it via Mott Media, and I have links, some Amazon. They are affiliate links now for Amazon to pick up reprints of this. But you could also get it online for free, right? It's on archives, and I've got links to that too as well. So I thought, I'm going to try this with my kids. And honestly, my expectations were not high. But I figured, I look at my husband's grandmother, who in a couple weeks turns 100. Actually, it's next week. She turns 103 years old, and she's brilliant. She did go to a high school. However, I found out, I thought she graduated when she's 18. She didn't. She graduated when she's 16. So really, the bulk of her education was up through 8th grade in a one-room schoolhouse in the late 20s, early 30s. By the way, she totally still has her wits about her. I've done videos, short videos with interviews with her, and she's still doing great, getting ready for her birthday next week. But she's brilliant, right? She's brilliant. And my own grandfather, who passed away many years ago, who would be would be a centurion plus, he was brilliant and only had an 8th grade education. But when we look at what they were reading and studying, and as I've gone over these historic books, I've realized that perhaps we've got a lot missing, and we've digressed in education, not progressed. So just FYI, I currently have well over 100 vintage textbooks and have been collecting them since starting. So let's talk about what's worked and what hasn't. I started with 2 vintage textbooks with my kids. This is Stoddard's Juvenile Mental Arithmetic. It's really tiny. Even on the back, it's got the times tables on it, if you can see. It's really cute. But I didn't love this book. I felt like it was a little bit confusing in some ways. So in some of the pages are similar to Ray's. This is also from the late 19th century. So I didn't love this one. Especially, like, I started doing this one and then I'd compare it to Ray's, and I do this with my kids. And very quickly, my kids preferred Ray's. Now, this is for first and second grade, and it goes all the way up through high school. And then they do hit, this series has a practical arithmetic and intellectual arithmetic. And then it does go into geometry, et cetera, with their high school books, which I have one of the original copies there of their high school books, which goes into geometry and whatnot. And so very quickly, what astounded me is how simple the lessons were compared to some of the, not only the public schooling books that I had, but also the homeschooling books. Again, the homeschooling books are still better than the public school textbooks that my kids used to use. But there's still a lot of fluff, and sometimes it's confusing, and I'd have to go online to understand things. And I've used a variety of homeschooling curriculum, and some people love the homeschooling mathematics curriculum and arithmetic curriculum. But for me, sometimes it just felt like it was just a lot of extra. And so I was surprised when we started doing Raise, and the lessons were really short. Now, granted, I started both of my children, and it's my youngest two that I'm using these textbooks with. One is now 10, the other is now 14. And I just started with the first book. And my 14-year-old zipped through it and is on the highest book that you can get of the elementary series. And he's actually already done geometry and algebra, but we're going through some of those principles in the Raise series. And I've actually loved this series for that reason. It's very easy to get through. It's very simple and it's very straightforward, and the lessons are short. And even within some of the lessons, it allows you to, like this lesson, they're writing the numbers, and it says in the book, if you need to, you can just do part of it, and that's fine. But to keep the lessons short and use real objects and things like that. Now, I've done some how-to videos on using Raise New Primary Arithmetic, so you can find that on the YouTube channel. But I've loved Raise New Primary Arithmetic, and my kids like it. They don't love it, right? But they like it better than all the other curriculum we've used. And we've used a lot. So this has been a delight. So when I started seeing success with Raise, I decided then, okay, this works. What else can I use? And I also had in my possession Harvey's Elementary Grammar and Composition. So this is the next one that I added a few months ago. So it was about a month into using Raise that I decided to look at Harvey's Elementary Grammar and Composition. Again, this is late 19th century. And my kids actually really like this book. So it starts with talking about the senses, and then it goes through language and the sentence. When we started getting to like sentence making and how to make a sentence and different kinds of sentences, I was expecting my kids to hate it, especially my now 14-year-old. But he was like, this is actually kind of fun. The lessons are very short. It doesn't take us more than about 15 minutes to get through a lesson. My daughter, who is 10, actually, sometimes with the lessons, she'll want me to extend the lessons with adding more sentences. But it's very, very straightforward. There's not a lot of extra, whereas with a lot of the homeschooling curricula that's current, again, better than what we had in the public school, but still had a lot of fluff to it, a lot of extra to it. This is really straightforward. And this book begins for 4th grade. I've had people ask me, well, what do you do prior to 4th grade? Well, historically, what they would do is they would have the children learn spelling, and they would do copy work, which I've talked about before, where they literally were given a passage and they would copy it word for word and copy the punctuation, copy the capitalization. They'd start with one word, and then as they, grew in their abilities to write, they would increase the number of words into sentences. And then by the time they're in, 4th or 5th grade, they're doing, 2 or 3 sentences. As they got older, more and more sentences. In high school, they would continue and do it. Granted, they didn't have high school for the most part. A few people did, but most people didn't. But they would be doing, by the time they're 14, full paragraphs, and in some cases pages and pages, which is, Benjamin Franklin. That's how he learned to write, was doing copy work. So I loved Harvey's Elementary Grammar and Composition. And then the follow-up book to this is Harvey's English Grammar. And so this has been really a fun book. I'm still working on this with my 14-year-old. And so it's interesting because this is for, 4th through roughly 6th grade. And then the second book is 7th through 8th grade. But as I compare what this has kids do compared to what a lot of the kids in the public school system are doing in high school and even some college students, this is far superior. Now, I've been accused by some people online, well, you're out of touch, you don't know. Y'all, I am still very much involved with public schools and public school kids through various things. I've been asked to be a consultant with a private school. I've been asked by an assistant superintendent to consult with a school district, with their school district. Like I'm very, very familiar of what's going on in the public school system. And I still work heavily with public school kids as well as homeschooling kids. So I am not out of touch. I know what is going on. Plus, I have a lot of friends who are still teachers. And I look at the writing of most high school kids. I'm in a wealthy district that's, that where the kids, like the expectation is that the kids would be better writers and they're not. And then plus I was in hiring for 20 years. And by the time I stopped hiring and I was getting, hundreds of resumes a day as I was hiring for all these different companies, even up to when I stopped hiring 3 years ago, or is it 4 years ago? 2023, I stopped hiring. I was getting cover letters that were from college graduates, and there would be no punctuation, no capitalization. The grammar was abysmal. The spelling was abysmal. And I thought, how did this person, and it wasn't just one, it was multiple over and over and over again. How did these people graduate from college? So as I looked at this and I watch how my kids are learning, they're already more advanced than some high school students and frankly, some college students. So we've actually loved the Harvey's Elementary Grammar and Composition. This has been amazing. Again, you can buy reprints of this through Mott Media. I've included some Amazon affiliate links, as well as you can find it online and just print it out yourself for free, which I've also included in the show notes for you guys or in the description. So this has been really great. Again, it starts at roughly fourth grade, so roughly 9-10 years old. Before that, you just have them work on spelling and copy work. And then you move them into this. And then there's the follow-up book is Harvey's English Grammar, which I've also got links for. So we've loved this. We have loved this one. Okay, next book. So then 3 months ago, I was introduced to the McGuffey Readers. Now, I had read in one of, I think it's The Underground History of Education by John Taylor Gatto, which is a fabulous book. Anything by John Taylor Gatto is wonderful. And he references a fifth grade teacher who was astounded, and this is in 1995, that her students were barely able to read basic 3-letter words like man and cat, some 2-letter words they struggled with. But yet she noticed that from her research that kids in the late 19th century were reading Shakespeare and different things like that. The Federalist Papers, and she referenced in the book that they read from the Appleton School Readers. So I picked up some original copies. By the way, I find these on eBay. I find them on Facebook Marketplace, on Amazon. I found them on Etsy, at estate sales, sometimes garage sales. So vintage books are not hard to come by. You just have to look. So I picked up the Appleton School Readers, and so I have the collection of them, Readers 1, the first through the 6th reader, and they're good, but their focus tends to be more whole language because we do see a shift even in the 19th century from phonics-based to whole language, and they're good, right? Compared to what we have today, they're good. But I didn't like them as much as I liked the McGuffey Readers. And so even though I have originals of all of the Appleton School Readers, some are in better shape than others. They've got a bunch right there. I stopped using the Appleton School Readers because I didn't like them as much as I liked the McGuffey Readers. But the McGuffey Readers, again, you can buy reprints of these. You can find them online and download them for free yourself and reprint them. Mott Media has the McGuffey Readers, but I love the simplicity of them. This is a contemporary reprint. This is actually an original, but they look very similar. You can tell this one does not have an ISBN on it. This one does. But I love the McGuffey Readers because They're simple. There are 6 McGuffey readers. Well, technically there's a couple more because you've got the McGuffey's pictorial reader, and then you've got the McGuffey's primers, and they progress with the child. Just because it says 4th doesn't mean it's for 4th grade. My very my 14-year-old, who's an excellent reader, is in the 4th reader. So it doesn't correspond necessarily with age, but with ability. And the higher that it gets, the more complex the language gets. Their language in the 19th century is far more complex than our language. But my kids have not had a problem with the readers or the primers picking up the language. They are phonics based, which is one of the reasons that I like them. They start with, this is the first eclectic primer, and it has the illustrations are beautiful, and it starts with the alphabet, and then it starts with, like, this is showing the phonetical pronunciation, and some of the readers have the phonetical pronunciation guide for those of us who, well, I actually took a phonics class in college, but for those that are not familiar with that, there is a phonetics guide. And then it also has cursive for the kids to do copy work. Again, this would be for a newer reader. The pictorial primer would be for a brand new reader. I have that one upstairs, but this one is very basic. It starts with like this is lesson 1, and cat, rat, and it shows there's the A, and that's the sound is a. That's what it looks like. And then so it shows the phonetics, and then the child can start practicing a rat, a cat, a rat, and a cat. And the illustrations are beautiful. The etchings are beautiful. So we've been reading the McGuffey readers, and then I've been having my kids do copy work out of this, as well as poetry and scripture, but it has the cursive, and they've really liked these. Again, the readings are pretty short, but they teach morality and beautiful lessons. Now, I get people who have said to me via video or, reels or shorts, but what about the racism that's in these books? The reality is, like, my kids and I have discussed history. We have discussed how things have shifted, how ideas have shifted, how we perceive people have shifted. And occasionally you'll come across some racism in some of the books. Okay. That's true. You will. Because the perception of the world was different than it is today. And so it becomes a beautiful opportunity to discuss how people thought back then and why they thought the way that they did. It enables us, to talk about things like the Civil War, and so even though, yeah, occasionally racism does come up, that lends itself to beautiful conversations. So I do love the McGuffey readers. They also don't shy away from talking about God. So if you are a secular homeschooler and you're like, well, I want to use some vintage curricula, know that the McGuffey readers do talk about God, particularly those prior to the turn of the 20th century. So we've loved the McGuffey readers. We read them about 3 times a week. All of our lessons we do about 3 times a week. We don't do it every day necessarily. So we did abandon the Appleton School readers. We did abandon Stoddard's. And so that's what we're currently using. And then I've showed this on a short before. We picked up this map. It's called this Sin chronological chart or map of histories, and it's like 26 feet long, and it unfolds. There's a couple different versions of these sold. This one goes back to Adam and Eve, and it was published in like 1878-ish. This is a reprint, and so that's been fun to look at history. Now, I will be doing a whole video on comparing historical texts from the 19th century to today. I did finally get a copy of the textbooks used at the school by my house. I called some friends and talked to their kids about, like, okay, what are you reading in your AP history class? And they're like, this, but we don't have a physical copy. We only have the online copy. And I got a hold of a physical copy. So I will be talking, I do various things about history. I'll be doing a video about what we use for history and what we do for history. It's a little bit it's nonconformist, but it works. So I am adding some books that are vintage books because y'all, I have come to love these books. They are straightforward. They get to the point. The kids understand them. I know some of you are like, yeah, but you never get to the point. I know. I'm a wordy person and I'm long-winded. Sorry. You can fast forward me if you need to. But I've come to love them because they're written so that children understand. They're written so that even adults who struggle with things can understand. That's what makes them timeless, is their simplicity and their straightforwardness. Okay, so now I'll be adding a few more books. So I want to introduce you to some of the vintage books that I've collected and that we'll be adding here very shortly, starting with these two books. These are actually turn of the 20th century. I just started using them last week with my 14-year-old. They're really for a little bit older, composition and rhetoric for schools. And then this one is practical rhetoric. Rhetoric is the art of persuasion. And so we started with rhetorical principles. And so we're working on using these. I started with this book first, the practical rhetoric. My 14-year-old didn't love it, but that's okay. I said, sometimes we have to do things that we don't love. And so we read over the first chapter. It took us just a few minutes and then we were done, discussed it. Then I've got, at the suggestion of my good friend Sherry Hayes from the Mom Delights channel, one of the things that she used with her 15 kids, well, I guess she used it with some of her later kids, is Pineo's Analytical Grammar. I did get a copy of it. And again, most of these you can find in online archives. So I'll put links to them if you're interested in looking at them. This one talks about etymology. And so we will be using this in conjunction with the Harvey's English Composition and Grammar. She said this is a fabulous one to work in conjunction with that. So we'll be adding this one in the next couple months to our language study. And then this one, okay, I've shared this before. This one is the Common School Spelling Book. I cannot find it in online archives. I picked it up from a man here in Colorado who was selling his parents' textbooks. And there was actually 2 copies. The other copy is pretty delicate and worn. This copy, it's beautiful because it gives it like a poem or a song. Here, I'll just show you. I'll be delicate with this. It gives a poem or a song, and then it has spelling words to go with it. And so we will be implementing this in the fall as well with the McGuffies, and kind of do McGuffies probably once a week and this once a week. But I love this book. Again, this is currently not in online archives. I cannot find it in the Library of Congress. I can't find it in the Gutenberg project. So I am working on digitizing this one right now. And any books that I find that are currently not in online archives, I'm working on digitizing. Update with that. It is a lot more arduous process than I thought it would be, because the scanners that I had and the apps that I have don't scan the pictures very well. And I want to be able to show the beautiful illustrations in all these books. And I finally found a scanner that might work. And so I've been slowly scanning it. It's been a very arduous process. When I am done scanning this book, I am going to make it available to buy a reprint of it, as well as have it on my website so you can download it for free, because I want people to have access to this beautiful, beautiful book. This was published at the turn of the 20th century. Oh, actually 1913. And it's just beautiful. So this one I'm working on digitizing, and then I'll be using this for my own kids as well. I just have to be super careful because I can't find any other copies of it. And I do have 2 copies, but this is the better copy. So stay tuned. Like I said, it's been a very long and arduous process. I even met with a genealogist at a Carnegie library to discuss what to do about this, because I want to make sure that people have access to it. Another one, you can buy a reprint of this. It's such a pretty book and it's such a fun book that I want to use for copy work for my daughter. It's called With Pencil and Pen. Again, this is one of the 20 books that I got from the gentleman who was selling his parents' textbooks. And it has stuff for copy work. And it's just this sweet little book. It has riddles in it, and it was a language book. I do love that whatever child like wanted to color the pictures. So she colored the fruit. He or she colored the fruit. Anyway, but this was used. This one was, let's see, this one was published. I want to say it was like 1906. So With Pencil and Pen, this is another one you can buy reprints of. But I am scanning this one as well, just because I love the sweetness of this book. And this would be great for, you know, roughly like second, third grade, even first grade to start copying, to do copy work with. So this is a primary language book with pencil and pen. And I'll include that and links to this so you can find it on the online archives if you want to print it out yourself or if you want to pick up a digital copy. So this one we're going to start using just for copy work every now and again. This one, because a lot of people have asked about science books. I have higher level science books, physics books, chemistry books. I haven't delved into those just yet. But when I do, I will make a video about those books too, because I have probably 5 or 6. Astronomy. Most of them are turn of the century. Some of them are mid to late 1800s. The others are like 1913. But this one was suggested to me by a teacher online in the comments. This is How Plants Grow. Botany for young people, How Plants Grow. And he had mentioned that this particular gentleman had mentioned that he uses it in his science classes in secondary education and that he printed it out online because he loves it, but he didn't have a copy. Well, I was able to find a copy. And this one is by Asa Gray. And so we are going to be, along with our nature study and nature journaling, because I do love nature journaling. This one is published 1858. It's all about botany for young people. And so in the fall, we're going to start using this one as part of our science. Now, I do outsource science normally for my youngest two, but I do want to employ this along with nature journaling because it's just a super cool book. It has it came with a little cover. I found this one, y'all, on Amazon, and it's an original copy. Like I said, you can find them, you just have to look. Then I just got this one last week. This is the Palmer Method of Business Writing. Now, this is a turn of the century book. Actually, it's a little bit later. It's like 1936. So I've gone into what handwriting, like what kind of writing was used during the writing of the Declaration of Independence, and that was a round hand. And so I've been looking for books that teach that kind. I think the closest handwriting book that resembles that kind of writing is actually the Spencerian penmanship books. These are reprints I got off Amazon. I can include links for these. They're published by Mott Media as well. Mott Media does a lot of vintage books, and they're great. And so the Spencerian handwriting and penmanship is very slanted, very curly. It's very beautiful. And then the Palmer Method of Business Writing, if you look at writing for most of the greatest generation, the silent generation, which would be my parents, my husband's grandmother is the greatest generation. If you look at their handwriting, it all looks very, very similar. It's because they were taught through the Palmer Method of Business Writing. And so I am going to copy this one. It's in public domain, so I'm legally allowed to do that. But it's cool. So I just got this one in last week. And so I was going to make copies and then have my kids practice it because we've been using the Good and the Beautiful handwriting books, and I like them. I like them. They do some great copy work and things like that. But I don't love my kids' handwriting still. And so I want them to practice. This gives actual like practical techniques to get them to get that muscle memory versus most handwriting curricula, which has you just practice the letters over and over. This has them practice shapes. See, like it shows that practice the shapes. The Spencerian penmanship book does the same, where they just practice the shape over and over and over again, and so that they get that muscle memory, which is really cool. So I am working on this one too, digitizing this one so that I can print it out for myself and my own kids and not have to use this book. But that's why their handwriting all looks very similar, as they were taught the same way. And notice I've yet to see a person from the greatest generation or from the silent generation who had ugly handwriting. Like, their handwriting was all very, very beautiful. So those are the books that I am adding to our curricula. And yeah, that's what we're using. And I've loved it, y'all. Like, as I've mentioned before, the vintage curricula is really straightforward. And it's also inexpensive. And I think that's the thing that blew me away as well, is most of the current curricula that we have today is consumable. And then you look in public schools, and several of my friends are like, oh, my kids don't even get textbooks. Everything is online. We have to access the books online. In my daughter's concurrent enrollment classes through the state college, she doesn't have textbooks. Oh, she does, but they're all accessed online. And we had to pay like $75 for an online copy, of which we don't get to keep. And so at least with homeschooling curricula, you can have actual books. I mean, there is online curricula. I prefer physical, touchable books. That's just me. I'm a tactile person, and I don't want my kids staring at screens all day. I just don't. There is power in learning to use a book, and working with a book. So one of the blessings of vintage curricula is it's not consumable, right? I can reuse Harvey's and Ray's over and over and over again with all my kids, which is what they would do because they weren't in a consumer mindset. Whereas today, a lot of the curricula is consumable. And so you have to keep printing it or buy more as your kids get older. And as you finish with one child, you have to buy it for the next child. And that's not all of it, but it's a lot of it is very consumable. And these are not entirely consumable. The Spencerian penmanship, these are consumable because they actually practice. But like the language books, the mathematics books, the arithmetic books, the science books, they're not consumable. And so I can reuse them, and I could reuse them someday when I have grandkids, and I could give them to neighbors if they needed. So that's where we are. It's been a wild ride, but I have loved it, and I'm going to continue to collect vintage books and make them available to people online, because I want to bring back the wisdom of the ages and marry that with the blessings that we have of modernity today. Yeah. So that's where I am. So I will put links for all of these books in the show notes and in the description so that you can have access to these. Those that I can't find online, I am working on digitizing and reprinting and making them available for those who just want to reprint them themselves. I want you to have access to these because the wisdom is timeless and simple and beautiful. And that's something that we can definitely get back to. And it's something that I can wholeheartedly get behind. So with that, my friends, moms and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. You got this. We will talk next week.